Thank you very much for that generous introduction. My presentation is entitled Indentured Laborers in Coconut and Rubber Plantations in Trinidad in the Caribbean from 1845 to 1920. Now, why did I choose that time period, 1845? It is the year in which indented immigrants first came to Trinidad. And although the immigration of indented laborers ended in 1917, there were still people working in the plantations as indentured laborers until 1920. So this is the outline and sequence of my presentation. It's subdivided into many categories: objectives, limitations, literature review, theoretical framework, methodology, and so on. But I am going to focus only on the items that are bulleted in red: coconut and rubber, data and analysis, discussion, and conclusion. And I'm going to stick to the theme of the conference, which is labor practices and human rights. So this is the background. It is not widely known today that Indian immigrants also worked on coconut, and rubber plantations in Trinidad during indentureship. The problem statement is that indentureship system was inherently a system of structural exploitation. If you look at the image on your left, you would see a man and a horse. Most likely he's white. He is either the planter or the manager or the overseer. But you see he's symbolically elevated. While others are working in the sugarcane, he's riding a horse. And most likely he has either a whip in his hand or a gun. The rules of the game were in favor of the colonial government and plantation owners. In Trinidad, at the time of indentureship, the colonial government was British. In other countries in the Indian diaspora, the government could be Dutch, could be French, or could be Danish, as in the case of St. Croix. The rules of the game were in favor of the colonial government, and the indentured laborers suffered unfreedom, meaning that they were not free and they were not slaves. Now, though 143,000 immigrants came to Trinidad alone, such a large number, they didn't have a union, so there was no collective labor power. So the contract was not in their favor. This is a photo I took when I did my research in 2007, 14 years ago. A relic of barracks, little updated because you see concrete steps and wooden walls instead of the dirt, and you see the galvanized roof instead of the thatch roof, and so on. But these are barracks that are still there in the same estate. And the people I interviewed are descendants, third generation of indented laborers in the coconut estate. That picture was taken on a coconut estate. So in 2007, I interviewed and photographed these people. They recounted their stories and told me how their grandparents had worked in the same estates in which they live. I would have liked to do updated research, field research for this conference, but the pandemic really restricts my movement. So literature review, I am going to skip this, but I'm really interested in capturing the actual faces, voices, and memories of those descendants of Indian immigrants. Theoretical framework, in the interest of time, again, I'm just going to browse this, but you would see I use Karl Marx theory of exploitation, of which is about the unfair advantage of indentured laborers in this case, and an asymmetry of power between employers and workers. Methodology: as an anthropologist, I take the anthropologist and ethno-historian approach. I focus on the narratives of people without documented histories, and I focus on real life experiences of people who are silent or silenced. Ordinary people I focus on. I draw in some information from my book, published in 1985, 36 years ago. And in this book, I interviewed people who were indented, people like Mr. Sankaram, who worked as an indented laborer in the sugarcane fields. Then he transitioned to the cocoa estates and then to the rubber. So he told me he was alive 36 years ago. I was very fortunate to meet him. He was a surviving ex-indented immigrant, and he told me about his transition. And he said, they put me in rubber, I get paper, and they tell me, Babu, if you want to work in the estate, same work, same price, stay. And if you have to work with anybody outside, same money. And you custom already with everybody working. Rubber have no driver, no overseer, but when you're working in cocoa, you have driver. So what he's really saying there is that this is one of the benefits in working in the rubber plantation, in which there was no driver and no overseer over your back. So I get to the meat of my presentation, which deals with rubber and indented and free labor. And this is where I did my field research, non-parallel estate in Sangre Grande area. And a few hundred Indians were indented in rubber estates in Trinidad and perhaps Guyana. So I still have to do research in Guyana. I have to do more research in Trinidad, but also new research in Guyana to see if Indians were indented in those rubber plantations. Rubber was cultivated as a possible alternative commercial crop after the fall of sugar prices. So these planters and so on took proactive plans, and they wanted to find alternative crops. So they started to cultivate cocoa, coconut, and rubber. Now these are all my photos. I haven't sourced them from the internet. Took during field research, and this is tapping rubber. You'll see the special knife there. You would see the cup in which the latex or the milk would flow or drip. And a laborer has to be very skilled. He or she has to know the depth in which he or she is going to make that incision, the width and the height, and so on, and at a certain angle. There is a pattern which is used to make these incisions in the bark of the tree. So as early as 1910, about 3,000 acres of land were cultivated in Rio Claro, and later another variety in Talparo, Ecclesville, Phoenix, Wyaby, Vecini, Biche, Mathura, and Sangre Grande. A lot of places all over Trinidad were under rubber cultivation. Non-parallel estate in Sangre Grande alone had 1,800 acres devoted to rubber. So a lot of places. Again, this is a photograph I took of the abandoned rubber estate in Kaiwal in Sangre Grande. Abandoned, but sawmillers use the logs to make boxing board, and beekeepers do thriving business because they set up the boxes and so on where the bees the bees are attracted to the nectar in the rubber, the flowers of the rubber trees. So actually the best honey in Trinidad comes from these abandoned rubber plantations. And it's not looking. What's going on here? Right. So Indented laborers were required to be in the fields before daybreak to be in tapping. So they had to go, some of them told me, as early as 3 a.m. in the morning. They had to be in these rubber plantations. Why so early? Um, because why is that when the sun comes out and it gets warm and hot, the flow of the milk from the bark lessens. Men and women are expected to tap 250 trees per day. And then it was a dangerous place to work because the workers would often get cut on their feet by the fallen sharp outer shells of the rubber seeds. They were too poor or couldn't afford or were not given washikong or shoes or boots and so on. So these seeds were very sharp. Not the seeds, really, shells covering the seeds. You can see a photo of the shells. They're very sharp and tough, like iron, and you can be cut, and they're sharp and cut very easily. So it was a dangerous place to work. Tappers were exposed to mosquitoes and ants and snakes in particular. A lot of snakes, infested with snakes, because the snakes would be attracted to the milk, white milk flowing from the fresh cuts in the bark. Men and women work equally hard, and they had to carry, um, without any form of machinery, they had to carry the buckets of this latex back to the station. So this is one of the relics that still remains of rubber cultivation. It's a great house in an estate called Non-Parallel Estate. And I took this photo 14 years ago. I've heard that it has collapsed. The National Trust didn't see it fit to preserve it. And it still stands there. And the laborers told me that they would go to this bangala, meaning bungalow, only when they have to collect their fortnightly earnings from the manager of the estate. So this was the manager's house. It was built in 1910 by Ernest Robinson, a white guy. So I moved to coconut now. Again, it's not widely known today that East Indian immigrants work on coconut estates. And when the price of sugar fell again, the planters were looking for alternative crops. And so they turned to cultivation of coconuts. The price and the cultivation of cocoa, coconut, and rubber increased dramatically with the arrival of indented immigrants from India. Many of them were indented directly to these estates. Sometimes they were re-indented, but they were also free laborers, free Indian laborers, ex-indented immigrants who worked in these plantations. And their work was very hard and they were exploited. So these estates, coconut estates, still exist, abandoned, of course, in the Manzanilla-Mayaro Road. If you are driving, you would see them. This is a recent photo, and in the Cedros area. Discussion, I'm coming to the end. So working in the coconut and rubber plantations under the system of indentureship facilitated forms of human exploitation for men, women, and children laborers. Children had to work as well. Unfair wages. You have to work very early, sometimes very late. Extra work, no extra pay. Danger to the health and safety. If you look at the coconut trees in the background there, workers had to climb these coconut trees without any kind of protective gear. So if you fall and you endanger yourself, that's your problem. No insurance in those days, nobody to take care of your family and all that. And so they were really exploited, robbed of their freedom and dignity. And the physical and material neglect, the barracks and so on, were really uninhabitable. They had to live there. sexual harassment, which we know. So in conclusion, I took this photo again. This is a relic of the past, in barracks in a coconut plantation on the Manzanilla-Mayaro Road. And it was really a system of exploitation of powerless immigrants in terms of conditions of work and payment of wages. The legal system did not help them from abuse and injustice. You had a protector of immigrants who was of little help. The court system was of little help. It was all in favor of the planters. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, and thank you very much.